So we're diving into something pretty incredible today. The secret diaries of Albert Speer. You know, Hitler's top architect, the guy who designed the Third Reich. But this isn't about his time in power. This is about what happened after. He spent 20 years locked away in Spandau Prison, and he wrote everything down. And I'm telling you, this is more than just a memoir. It's a raw look inside the mind of a man facing the ultimate test, just plain psychological survival. We're going to explore what it's like to face a sentence so long it's practically a lifetime. It's about a mind in exile and its battle against, well, nothingness.
Right from the get-go, he asks himself, I still have 20 years ahead of me. Will I survive them? And that question, it sets the stage for everything that follows. He's not really talking about physical survival, he's talking about his mind. How does anyone even begin to process a chunk of time that huge, that unimaginable? This is the absolute heart of his struggle, what we're going to call maximum duration. It's this fight to just stay sane when your entire future is nothing but a prison cell.
20 years. Just let that sink in. That's 7,300 days. It's a number so big, it almost doesn't feel real, right? It's just abstract. And for Speer, this wasn't just about doing the time. It was about crossing a vast psychological desert. His entire diary, when you really get down to it, is like a survival manual. It's one man's playbook for fighting this crushing, incredible weight of time, his own private war against maximum duration.
Okay, so to really get the scale of his fall, you have to understand just how high he was. This wasn't some low-level guy. We're talking about Albert Speer, Hitler's chief architect, later his minister of armaments. This guy was at the dead center of the Nazi power structure, literally shaping the war effort and designing the grand, terrifying symbols of the Reich. He went from planning a new world capital to sharing a toilet with 6 other guys. The drop is just staggering.
So the judgment comes down. And you'd think, right, that avoiding the death penalty would be a huge relief. But for Speer, it really wasn't. That vast, empty horizon of 20 years, it felt like a totally different kind of death sentence. Not a quick one with the gallows, but a slow, grinding process of being psychologically erased.
And get this, he hears that his colleagues who were sentenced to death will be sedated before it happens. And his reaction is just chilling. He writes, they have it behind them. He almost envies them. Think about that. For them, it was over. For him, the real ordeal, that long, soul-crushing fight with maximum duration, was only just getting started.
So once the shock wears off, the real enemy shows up. And that enemy is the void. The sheer, endless, grinding monotony of a life where every single day is exactly the same as the one before. And that's the real challenge of a sentence this long, isn't it? It's not about the big, dramatic moments. It's about surviving the soul-crushing sameness of thousands upon thousands of identical days.
And this is what that kind of time, that maximum duration, does to you. Time itself starts to fall apart. It loses all structure. The years just blur into this gray fog. The only thing that marks the passage of time are these catastrophic breakdowns. You see it right here. In his 8th year, some rumors, a tiny bit of relief. But then year 9, a lung infarction, a total psychological collapse. Fast forward to year 19, and it's just this constant nagging despair as his hopes fail. Time isn't a series of events anymore. It's just a sequence of collapses, with these little false glimmers of hope in between.
And what did that void actually feel like, day to day? Well, life was stripped down to its most basic, grim components. He talks about cells so cold, we're talking near zero temperatures, that he had to wear socks on his hands just to be able to write. He goes into detail about these furious arguments with the other prisoners over whose turn it was to clean the guards' toilets. Christmas? The big celebration was another prisoner giving him a tiny piece of bacon. This was his reality. This petty, freezing, grim world was the battlefield for his survival.
So how in the world do you fight back against something like that? Against the pure emptiness of maximum duration? You obviously can't escape physically. But Speer, well, he was an architect, and he realized he had to build an escape route, but inside his own mind. So he came up with this incredibly detailed, structured plan that became his #1 weapon against the void.
I mean, just think about that for a second. How do you escape a prison yard without ever actually leaving? When your entire world is just a small loop of a garden, walked over and over and over again, thousands of times, how do you stop it from feeling like a cage?
Well, he tackled it just like an architect would. To beat the formless void, he used structure. He got obsessed with it.
First, he measured the garden circuit, 270 meters. He set a daily goal for himself. Then, he got maps and books from the library and plotted a real-world course. He decided to walk from Berlin to Heidelberg. And from then on, every single lap he took in that yard was meticulously logged as a few hundred meters on this grand imaginary journey.
And the result? Over 20 years. This is the distance he walked. 31,816 kilometers. That's more than the distance around the entire planet at the equator. This number isn't just a statistic, it's the most tangible proof of his psychological endurance. He didn't just passively serve his time, he actively imposed his will, his own structure, onto it. He literally walked his way through maximum duration, one imaginary step at a time, all the way across Asia to the Bering Strait, and even further.
Of course, you can't just walk away from your past, even on an imaginary trip around the world. To survive the present, Speer had to confront his past. And for him, that past really had one name: Hitler. His whole relationship with the man who had made his career and then caused his downfall became this central, haunting obsession for those 2 decades.
And the gulf between that past and his present, it was just massive. He'd find himself remembering these moments with Hitler, watching him sketch out these insane, grandiose visions for a 1,000-year Reich, new German cities in Russia, a Reichstag for 140 million people, and then, bam, he's back in reality, where the last living remnants of that empire are just 7 old men in a rotting prison, literally screaming at each other about who has to clean the toilets. That gap between the epic dream and the pathetic reality, that was with him every single day.
He talks about this one moment in his diary. He sees a photo of Hitler, and for the very first time, he's struck by how ugly, how repulsive the man's face was. And he's just puzzled, genuinely baffled. He asks himself, how was it that I overlooked this for so many years? He wonders if he was just so intoxicated by the power, the work, the grand architectural plans, that he never actually saw the man who was right in front of him. And that question, that puzzle, is something he wrestles with for the entire 20 years. So after 7,300 days of forced reflection, after literally walking around the world inside his head, what was the verdict? What conclusions did he finally come to about his own part in the whole catastrophe? This really became the final act of his time in prison, putting himself on trial.
He comes up with this interesting analogy, actually, after getting into an argument with the other prisoners. He says, look, think about a board of directors for a company. Every single member is responsible for what the entire company does. And then it hits him, and he writes about his shame. Hitler's inner circle, they didn't even act like board members. They'd, and this is his phrase, relieve themselves of all reflection and just let the boss handle everything. That was his final judgment on himself, that he had completely abdicated his own responsibility.
And then the end finally comes, and it's quiet, almost surreal. It's his last day, and he's standing there with Rudolf Hess, the one prisoner who was sentenced to life who would never leave. They're just watching a truck make a delivery of coal, a totally normal, everyday event, but in that moment, it takes on this huge symbolic meaning.
Hess looks at this huge pile of coal and says, so much coal, and from tomorrow on, all for me. And just, wow. For Speer, the clock is hit 0. His war with maximum duration is finally over. But for Hess, the clock just reset, only this time it's for a solitary eternity. That one simple haunting line just perfectly captures the total isolation that was waiting for the last man left in Spandau.
Which brings us to the final lingering question. All of this meticulous reflection, these thousands of pages of diaries, was it a genuine search for truth and remorse, or was it just the ultimate survival strategy, a brilliant, complex, intellectual game designed by an architect's mind to endure an otherwise unbearable 20 years? That's the really unsettling question that sits at the very heart of the Spandau Diaries, and it's one I'll leave with you.